They met in silence, one man haunted by war, one woman marked by it. In a quiet roadside diner, a single-dad veteran poured her coffee every morning, never realizing she was a decorated soldier hiding a secret worth millions. But when 6 lawyers in black suits showed up asking for him, the entire town learned that kindness can uncover more than any investigation. Before we begin this true journey of courage, compassion, and redemption, take a second to subscribe to Soul Moment Story. Because here, every story reminds us that even in the darkest places, kindness still wins. Now let's begin. The sun had barely begun its slow crawl above the pine trees lining the edge of town, casting long shadows across the worn asphalt of Route 17. In the early hush of morning, the only sound that stirred was the faint jingle of a bell as the door to Liberty Diner creaked open. Michael Bray stepped inside, wearing his usual green military jacket, frayed at the cuffs, faded at the shoulders, with a patch on the sleeve that once read, Special Operations Command. His long hair was tied back loosely, and his boots moved quietly across the tile, as if out of habit, not necessity. He didn't speak. He never did at first light. The diner was his sanctuary, a modest, cozy place with 6 booths, 4 bar stools, and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in 3 years. The coffee machine hissed to life as he switched on the lights. A soft hum filled the room as the jukebox flickered, cueing up old country tunes that had become the heartbeat of the place. By 5:15 a.m., the regulars began to drift in. Veterans, mostly quiet men with weathered eyes and stiff knees, who nodded more than they spoke. One of them, Joe Hammond, leaned his cane against the booth near the window and said, "Mornin', Mike." Michael just offered a small smile and poured him the usual black coffee, 2 sugars. No one asked much about Michael. They respected him because he respected silence. He'd been running the diner for 6 years since returning from the sandbox, as he sometimes referred to it. Afghanistan, Iraq, somewhere between them and the ghosts he wouldn't name. He was a single father. Everyone in town knew that much. His 10-year-old son, Ethan, was usually dropped off at school by 7:30 after helping wipe down the counter and sneaking an extra hash brown into his backpack. Ethan was bright, too bright for how much he'd seen, but Michael kept the boy grounded with a kind of gentle discipline that no one questioned. That morning, as Michael plated up eggs and sausage for the 2 older Marines in the corner, he noticed something strange through the steam rising from the griddle. The door opened, slow and unsure. She walked in like a shadow, tall, straight-backed, but limping slightly. Her army fatigues were standard issue, but they clung awkwardly to her frame, as if she hadn't worn them in a while. A service cap hung from her fingers, and a jagged scar ran from her left cheekbone to the corner of her jaw, faint but unmistakable. Michael paused spatula in midair. She didn't make eye contact, just chose the far booth corner seat back to the wall and sat down like she was preparing for impact. A veteran's instinct. He poured her a coffee, brought it to her table. Cream or sugar? She looked up, then startled as if pulled from a fog. "Black," she said quietly. He nodded, placed it down, and didn't linger. No questions, no small talk, just a glance at the trembling in her fingers as she lifted the cup to her lips. For the next 20 minutes, the diner moved around her, but she remained a still point in the storm. She didn't eat, only sipped her coffee, and watched the rain smear across the window like smoke. When it was time to close the griddle for the morning shift, Michael glanced over. She hadn't moved. He approached again, a plate in hand. "You didn't order, but I figured this might help." It was a slice of toast cut perfectly in half, not fancy, just warm, simple. She looked at it, then at him. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not trust, but recognition. Recognition of someone who understood not to ask, "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough, scarred like the rest of her. Michael just nodded and walked back behind the counter. By the time Ethan came in swinging his backpack and humming Johnny Cash, the woman had quietly left. No name. No farewell. But her presence lingered. "Dad." Ethan said, pulling himself onto a bar stool, "Was that lady a soldier?" Michael looked at the empty booth. "Yeah, I think so." "She looked sad," the boy added. Michael didn't answer. The next morning she came again. Same time, same booth, same black coffee. This time she tried to slice her own toast, and her hand trembled so violently the knife clattered to the plate. Without a word, Michael walked over, gently cut it for her again. Her eyes glistened, and her lips twitched in what might have been a smile, or maybe a memory. Each day she returned, and each day the routine grew quieter, deeper. He never asked her story. She never told it. But something passed between them, an unspoken code, forged by war grief and dignity. By the end of the week, the other veterans noticed. Mike Joe said one morning, nodding toward her table, "You making a move on the soldier lady." Michael chuckled, wiping his hands on a towel. "It's not like that." But maybe it was exactly like that. Not romance, not yet, not even friendship. It was recognition. Two wounded souls who'd stopped bleeding but hadn't started healing. And in that small diner, near an old military base, healing began, not with words, but with toast, cut just right, and coffee poured without questions. The fog hung low the next morning, like a worn blanket draped over the sleepy town. Outside, Liberty Diner, drops of dew clung to the window panes, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Inside, Michael Bray had already fired up the grill, his movements precise and quiet as always. He moved with the kind of grace only a soldier-turned cook could possess, economical, intentional, unhurried, but always aware. She came in at exactly 6:07 a.m. Michael had memorized the sound of her boots before she even reached the door. That subtle drag of her right heel, the hesitation before the door creaked open, and then the quick scan of the room, like a combat reflex she hadn't shaken. Same uniform, same booth, same quiet stare through the window. But this morning her hands were worse. She sat with them folded tightly in her lap, fingers twitching ever so slightly, as if holding back an invisible tremor. Michael brought her black coffee before she could ask. He gently set it down along with the toast, cut precisely diagonally just as before. But today, instead of walking away, he stood beside the table hands in his apron. "Some mornings are harder than others," he said softly. She didn't look at him at first, just stared at the coffee, then finally met his gaze. Her eyes were striking icy blue, but dulled by something deeper than fatigue. Something bone deep, a kind of sorrow that no amount of sleep could heal. "I didn't come here to talk," she replied, her voice flat, brittle. "I didn't say you had to," Michael said gently. "Sometimes it helps, though." Talking. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a breath, like she was exhaling a memory, she murmured, "You cut it just right." The toast. Michael gave a half smile. Military precision. Old habits die hard. That earned him a flicker of something in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but softer. "You were Army?" she asked, tone still guarded. "Delta Force," he said quietly. "Retired. Got out when my boy turned 3. She looked at him more carefully now. "Michael Bray. That's your name on the sign." He nodded. "And the kid that sweeps the floor, Ethan," he said with unmistakable warmth. 10 going on 30. She nodded slowly. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "I'm Captain Sarah Monroe." Or at least I used to be. Michael waited. She took another sip, and then, perhaps realizing that words might be safer here than in her own head, she began to speak, not all at once, but in fragments. Served 15 years, she said. 12 overseas. 3 tours in Afghanistan. 1 in Syria. Michael didn't interrupt. He just stood by, still and present. The last one didn't go well. Lost 2 men. One was a kid, barely 20. His name was Evan. Her voice cracked slightly. She tried to cover it with another sip of coffee. We were clearing a village. I thought I had the perimeter locked, but the boy stepped on an IED. I was 5 feet behind him, took most of the shrapnel in my left leg. That's why I limp. Her eyes shifted back to the window. I made the call, told his parents myself. I thought that would help. A pause. It didn't. Michael's voice was steady. It never does. Silence stretched again. But it wasn't heavy. It was respectful. Michael knew exactly how fragile a soul could become when it was forced to carry too much memory. I can't hold a knife, she said suddenly, her voice trembling. Some days I can't even hold a pen. The tremor started 6 months ago. Nerve damage. She clenched her jaw, furious at the involuntary betrayal of her own body. I'm 38. I should be leading missions. Instead, I'm cutting toast like a child. You're not cutting toast, Michael replied gently. You're surviving. Sarah looked at him, her expression brittle. And what would you know about surviving? Michael didn't answer right away. He walked back behind the counter, refilled a pot of coffee, and returned with the carafe. I know what it's like to wake up sweating and not know why he said as he poured, to not recognize the man in the mirror, to flinch at fireworks in July, to sit in a parking lot outside the grocery store because the noise inside is too much. Sarah stared at him, and I know he added that healing isn't loud, it's quiet. It happens in places like this over coffee and burnt toast and quiet mornings. She blinked hard. He didn't press further. He simply nodded and walked away back to the grill, where the sizzle of bacon masked the weight of everything unspoken. By mid-morning, the diner had thinned out. A few regulars lingered over refills, but the crowd had gone. Ethan bounded in from the back room carrying his school backpack. He waved at Sarah without hesitation. Hi, ma'am. Sarah stiffened, but managed a nod. Hi. Dad, can I eat with her? Ethan asked. Michael raised an eyebrow, looking over at Sarah for permission. To his surprise, she gave the faintest nod. Ethan climbed into the booth across from her, legs swinging. You were in the army, right? He asked, all innocence and enthusiasm. Sarah hesitated. Yes, I was. My dad says soldiers are real-life superheroes, Ethan said, pulling out a comic book. But he never wears a cape. Sarah's lips parted slightly. Her gaze drifted toward Michael behind the counter, who kept his back turned, pretending not to listen. Maybe he doesn't need one, she said, her voice quieter now. Maybe the best ones don't. As Ethan left for school, Michael returned to Sarah's booth, a clean rag in hand. You stayed longer today, he observed. She nodded. Toast still good. She looked down at the plate, now empty save for a few crumbs. It was perfect, she said. Then she stood slowly, stiffly, and reached into her jacket. She pulled out a crumpled bill and placed it on the table. Michael pushed it back toward her. On the house. She stared at him. Why, she asked. Michael met her eyes, steady and kind. Because someone once did the same for me when I couldn't explain why mornings hurt. She didn't reply. She just held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and walked out into the fog. Michael stood there for a long time watching the empty booth. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling tomorrow morning she'd be back. By the end of the week, the diner had changed, but only for those who paid attention. For the rest of the town, Liberty Diner was still the same place it had always been. The booths were still upholstered in faded red vinyl, The linoleum floor still creaked near the register, and the walls were still lined with framed black and white photos of veterans from every war since Korea. But to Michael Bray, something had shifted, something subtle, yet unmistakable. Every morning, precisely at 6:07 a.m., Sarah Monroe walked through the door. She never needed to order. Her table was always clean, her coffee waiting black, no sugar, and her toast already sliced perfectly into triangles. Not halves, triangles. That detail mattered. Michael had noticed the way her eyes softened the first time he'd served it that way. He hadn't asked why. He just kept doing it. And Sarah noticed. She didn't say much. Most days she barely spoke at all. But there was a rhythm now, a silent, mutual understanding. And in the quiet between the clatter of silverware and the low hum of the jukebox, something gentle began to form a thread of trust, thin but growing stronger. Michael didn't pry. He never asked what she did the rest of the day, or where she went when she left. But he began to notice things. How she sometimes flinched when the back door slammed. How her right hand trembled when she lifted her cup on colder mornings. How she sat with her back always against the wall, eyes scanning every new face that entered the diner. But most of all, he noticed how she kept coming back. And that in itself was everything. One morning, Michael arrived before dawn to find a note taped to the diner's front door. Written in tight, angular handwriting. Didn't sleep. Too loud. Went for a walk. Don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow. He stood there for a long time, holding the note like it was something fragile. He didn't know why it mattered so much, only that it did. The next day, she returned. This time, she sat down with more ease. She even nodded to Joe Hammond, who raised his coffee cup in greeting. Michael brought her toast and coffee as usual. But today, he set something else on the table. A single white paper napkin. On it, in a child's handwriting, "Thank you for keeping my dad company. Ethan." Sarah stared at the note for several seconds. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. She folded the napkin carefully, slid it into her jacket pocket, and murmured, "He's a good kid." Michael smiled. Takes after his mom. Sarah looked at him for the first time that morning. "She not around past when Ethan was 5, he said, keeping his voice steady. "Cancer. Quick and cruel. I'm sorry." He nodded, grateful for her sincerity. "I think that's why I bought this place," he added. "After the deployments, after the funeral, I needed something small, something I could build with my hands, something that couldn't be taken away." Sarah traced the rim of her cup with her fingertip. "Is it enough wanting a place like this?" Michael looked around, the steam rising from the griddle, the photos on the walls, the quiet hum of people who'd seen too much and still showed up every day. "It's not about enough," he said. "It's about peace." Sarah absorbed that slowly. Later that week, Michael watched her do something unexpected. She stayed after breakfast. The diner had emptied out. The veterans had gone. Ethan had already left for school. And Sarah remained sitting at her booth with a look of quiet contemplation. Finally, she stood, walked over to the counter and cleared her throat. "Need help wiping down the booths?" she asked. Michael blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she replied. "But maybe I want to." He handed her a rag. They worked in silence, moving from table to table like two soldiers on a sweep. No wasted motion, no unnecessary talk. But when their hands met briefly over a bottle of cleaner, she didn't pull away. Michael looked up. Her eyes met his. Something passed between them. Not romantic. Not yet. But real. "Most people treat me like I'm made of glass," she said suddenly. "You're not. They either stare at the scar or pretend it's not there." "I see it," Michael said. "And I also see you." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave the faintest nod. "Then maybe I'll come by tomorrow," she said. "You always have a seat here." As spring crept into town, Sarah's presence at the diner, became as constant as the smell of bacon and the buzz of the neon sign out front. The other veterans grew used to her. Some even nodded respectfully. A few shared war stories which she listened to with a quiet attentiveness that surprised them. And Michael. He never changed his pace, never made a move, but his kindness never faltered either. He changed the light bulb above her booth when it flickered. He sharpened the knives but left a butter spreader at her table. He placed an extra sugar packet on the tray one morning, not because she asked, but because she glanced at it the day before. Kindness. Simple. Precise. Intentional. It became their routine. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah Monroe didn't feel like a ghost walking through her own life. One evening as Michael was closing up, Ethan sat at the counter finishing his homework. The boy looked up and said, "Dad, are you and Captain Sarah friends?" Michael wiped down the grill considering the question. "I think we're learning how to be." "Do you like her?" Michael paused. "She reminds me of someone I used to be." Ethan tilted his head. "That's kinda sad." Maybe Michael said. Or maybe it means there's still a chance to find him again. Ethan smiled. "You're already him to me." Michael looked at his son, really looked, and felt something loosen in his chest. Outside, he saw a figure moving down the sidewalk. Military stride, slight limp service cap tucked under one arm. Sarah. She didn't come in, just passed by, glanced at the window and gave a small wave. Michael lifted his hand in return. Nothing was said, but everything was understood. The sky cracked open just before dawn. Sheets of rain drummed against the tin roof of Liberty Diner, muting the usual chirping of morning birds. Thunder rolled over the hills like distant artillery, and for a moment, Michael Bray paused as he unlocked the door, his hand resting on the frame. Something about stormy mornings always brought memories he hadn't invited. Inside the diner was dim and hushed. The lights flickered briefly as the power adjusted to the downpour. Michael moved quietly, setting up the griddle, checking the percolator, wiping the fog from the front window. He glanced at the wall clock. 6:06 a.m. He didn't need to look to know she would be arriving in 1 minute. Every morning for nearly 3 weeks, Sarah Monroe had entered at exactly 6:07. Every morning except today. The door remained closed. 6:48. Still nothing. Michael frowned and poured a second coffee anyway, placing it on her usual table. He laid out the toast triangles, not halves, and added a small ramekin of strawberry jam she never asked for, but always used. 6:13. The diner was still empty. Outside, the rain thickened. Visibility dropped to a blur of gray. Michael stood behind the counter, eyes fixed on the entrance, as if sheer focus could will her through it. She didn't come. By 6:40, the usual regulars had trickled in, shaking water off coats and umbrellas. Joe Hammond grumbled about his arthritis, and 2 Navy vets argued over the merits of decaf coffee. Michael moved through the motions, serving smiling, flipping eggs, but something was off. The rhythm was there, but the soul wasn't. The seat in the far booth remained empty. At 7:02, the bell finally rang, but it wasn't Sarah. Instead, the door opened to reveal 6 men in tailored black suits. They were tall, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, government-looking. Each one had a small earpiece tucked discreetly in his collar. Behind them walked a man in a charcoal gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase and a polished cane. His salt and pepper hair was combed back meticulously, and his eyes scanned the diner with surgical precision. The entire place went silent. Michael instinctively stepped forward, body tensing not from fear, but from habit. His Delta Force instincts flared like a distant alarm. The suited man approached the counter and extended a card. "Mr. Bray?" he asked, voice deep and precise. "I'm Attorney Douglas Reeves. I represent Captain Sarah Monroe." Michael didn't take the card. He didn't move at all. The name hit him like a punch through a closed door. Reeves lowered his hand and continued evenly. Captain Monroe is currently hospitalized due to complications related to her service injury. She's under full medical care and temporarily unconscious. I've been granted full legal authority to act on her behalf. The diner was frozen. Only the rain spoke, pounding against the windows. Michael's jaw tightened. Why are you here? Reeves opened the leather briefcase and retrieved a sealed envelope. Captain Monroe left specific instructions. In the event of her incapacitation, I was to locate you immediately. Michael finally took the envelope. It was thick, heavy. His name was handwritten on the front in strong, angular script. Why me? He asked. Reeves didn't blink. Because she trusts you. And because what she's put into motion involves a matter of great importance and considerable danger. Michael stared at him, eyes narrowing. Danger. Before Reeves could answer, one of the suited men stepped forward and spoke quietly into his earpiece. Reeves gave a subtle nod, then returned his attention to Michael. There's more to Sarah Monroe than you may know, he said. She recently established a foundation, the Phoenix Valor Fund, intended to provide long-term assistance to wounded veterans. The fund currently holds over $27 million in secured assets. Michael blinked, stunned. Before she fell ill, Reeves continued. Captain Monroe initiated proceedings to appoint you as interim custodian of the fund. She signed the documents herself, witnessed, notarized, and legally binding. You'll find them in the envelope. Michael took a slow breath. The world had just shifted beneath his feet. This is insane, he muttered. Reeves didn't disagree. Perhaps. But she insisted. Said, and I quote, "If anything happens to me, Bray is the only one I trust, not to sell it all for headlines or politics." Michael opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a stack of legal documents, a notarized power of attorney, and tucked in the back a folded note on diner stationery. He unfolded it, recognizing Sarah's handwriting instantly. If you're reading this, I'm probably in a hospital bed, with machines doing the talking. I hate that. But I don't hate this decision. You always cut the toast the way I need it. I figure you'll handle bigger things the same way. With quiet hands, with care. Don't let them take it from the ones who need it most. As Michael folded the note, slowly pressing his thumb over her initials, Reeves cleared his throat. You should also be aware, a man named Victor Hale is likely to contact you soon. He was once a partner of Captain Monroe in the early phases of the fund. Their relationship deteriorated over questions of financial integrity. Michael raised an eyebrow. You mean he was stealing? I can't make legal claims. I can't prove, Reeves replied carefully. But I will say, this Sarah believed he was trying to gain control of the fund for personal use. She was preparing to expose him. Michael's voice dropped. And now she's in a hospital, just when she was about to blow the whistle. Reeves gave a slow nod. The timing is unfortunate. Michael looked past him out into the storm. He could almost see her sitting there in her booth, back to the wall, coffee in hand, watching everything and saying nothing. He turned back to Reeves. What do you need from me? Reeves placed a folder on the counter. I need you to sign these documents. Accept temporary custodianship. Help us hold the line until she recovers. If she recovers. Michael didn't reach for the pen right away. He looked at the booth again, still empty, but not forgotten. Finally, he picked up the pen signed where needed and handed the folder back. Reeves nodded once solemnly. Thank you. She made the right choice. As they turned to leave, Michael asked quietly, Where is she? Reeves paused at the door. VA hospital 2 towns over. Private wing. Room 407. And then they were gone, vanishing into the downpour as silently as they'd arrived. Michael stood alone in the diner, thunder rolling over the horizon, Sarah's note still warm in his palm. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, a war of another kind had just begun. The next morning, Liberty Diner opened later than usual. Michael Bray stood behind the counter, not in his usual worn military jacket, but in a plain gray flannel shirt. The color matched the storm clouds that still loomed over the town. He moved slower, quieter, his mind still echoing with the words from Douglas Reeves the day before. $27 million, a Wounded Veterans Foundation. And he was now its custodian. He had barely slept. The paperwork had sat on his kitchen table all night, glowing under a single bulb like a bomb waiting to go off. He had read Sarah's note at least 10 times. You always cut the toast the way I need it. I figure you'll handle bigger things the same way. It made no sense, and perfect sense, at the same time. By 7:30 a.m., the diner had begun to stir. A few regulars trickled in. Joe Hammond, the 2 Navy vets, a local deputy. They all greeted Michael like they always did. None of them knew that the man pouring their coffee now held legal control over one of the largest veteran support funds in the region. Michael didn't tell them. Not yet. He needed answers first. At 8:02, the door opened again, and in walked Douglas Reeves Rain, still clinging to his overcoat leather briefcase in hand. The diner fell silent again, tension rippling through the room like static. Michael nodded once toward the back room. We'll talk in private. Inside the small storage office behind the kitchen, surrounded by shelves of pancake mix and napkin rolls, Michael shut the door. All right, he said, arms crossed. Talk. Reeves set his briefcase down carefully on a crate and opened it. Inside was a thick binder neatly tabbed and color-coded. He handed Michael the top sheet, a balance statement from the Phoenix Valor Foundation. Sarah didn't just build this fund, Reeves began. She fought for every dollar. After her discharge, she lobbied both state and federal agencies for grant, support, secured private donors, and even dipped into her own pension. She intended this to be her legacy. Michael scanned the numbers. Grants, donations, and matching funds tallied up to $27.3 million. Spread across various accounts, each protected by restricted terms: housing assistance, medical reimbursements, therapy programs, and job transition services for disabled veterans. She never said a word, Michael muttered. She came in every morning like she didn't have more than the clothes on her back. She didn't do it for recognition, Reeves said. She did it because she knew what it was like to fall through the cracks. Michael looked up, and Victor Hale Reeves's expression tightened. Hale was a former defense contractor turned so-called philanthropist. He initially helped Sarah with fundraising and logistics, but she caught him attempting to reroute unallocated funds into a shell corporation, money laundering most likely. Did she confront him? She was building a case, Reeves said. But then, her health declined, rapidly. She had a seizure 2 weeks ago linked to an old cranial injury from combat. The doctors say it was stress-triggered. Michael felt something dark rise in his chest. You think Hale had something to do with it? Reeves hesitated. I can't prove it. But I can tell you this: 2 days before the seizure, Sarah filed a complaint to the Office of Inspector General, and the next morning she collapsed in her kitchen. Michael clenched his fists. The memory of Sarah sitting silently at her booth, her hands trembling, her eyes distant, hit him like a gut punch. She was terrified, Reeves said quietly. Not of dying, but of leaving the fund vulnerable. Michael stared down at the financial report again. And she put it in my hands. She trusted you, Reeves said, because you didn't want anything from her. Michael shook his head. She barely knew me. No, Reeves said she knew exactly who you were. She looked into your file, Mr. Bray. She knew about Delta. She knew about your Silver Star. And she knew you were the only man in town who never once asked about her scar. Michael looked away, throat tight. "She left one more thing for you," Reeves added. He pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it over. Michael opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, faded, torn at the edges. It showed Sarah in uniform kneeling beside a young soldier. They were both smiling. In the background was a forward operating base in Afghanistan. The desert wind had caught her hair, and her eyes were bright alive. On the back, written in pen, he didn't make it. But I did. For him. For them all. Michael stared at it for a long time, saying nothing. Reeves cleared his throat. "The hospital allows visitors starting at noon. She's in stable condition, but still unconscious. They're running tests." Michael folded the photo gently like it was something sacred and slid it into his chest pocket. "What do I do next?" he asked. Reeves didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another file and spread out a series of documents. "First, we secure the Foundation's control. That means freezing the discretionary accounts Hale might still have access to. Then, we get your temporary custodianship notarized and filed with the state." Michael nodded slowly. And after that, Reeves's gaze was steady. "We start digging. You and me. We find out exactly how deep Hale's corruption goes, and we bring it to light." Michael leaned against the wall, arms crossed again. "I've been out of that world for a long time, counselor," he said. "But I know how to spot a war when one's coming." Reeves offered a grim smile. "Welcome back to the fight, Mr. Bray." Later that day, after the lunch crowd had cleared and Ethan was safely at school, Michael locked up the diner for the afternoon. He stood in front of the mirror in the back office, looked at himself for the first time, not as a cook, not as a father, but as a soldier once more. He slipped on his old jacket, pulled the zipper halfway, and placed the folded photo back into the inside pocket close to his heart. Then he turned toward the door, toward the hospital, toward the storm ahead. Because someone had trusted him with more than toast and coffee. She had trusted him with her life's work, and Michael Bray wasn't about to let her down. The news broke before noon. By the time Michael returned to Liberty Diner, the town already knew. It started with a local blog post from a part-time reporter at the Hollow Creek Gazette, then made its way onto a regional veterans newsletter, and finally landed on social media, where the headline began to spread: "Wounded War Hero Appoints Local Diner Cook to Oversee $27 million Veteran Fund." At first, the reactions were a mix of disbelief and curiosity. By 3:00 p.m., curiosity had turned into confusion. By 5:00 p.m., confusion began turning into suspicion. And by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael Bray was no longer just a quiet veteran running a breakfast counter. He was a man under a microscope. That evening, as he scrubbed the countertop for the third time in 10 minutes, the bell above the door jingled again. It wasn't a regular. The man who stepped inside was in his late 50s, tan skin, expensive leather jacket, and a wristwatch that likely cost more than Michael's truck. His hair was slicked back, his cologne too strong for a diner that smelled like bacon and coffee. Michael knew who he was before he even said a word. "Mr. Bray," the man said, grinning like they were old friends. "Victor Hale. Pleased to finally meet you." Michael didn't return the handshake offered. Victor dropped his hand with a laugh. "That's all right. You strike me as the no-nonsense type." Michael said nothing. Victor looked around the diner, eyes sweeping across the walls lined with black and white photos of service members. Charming place. Real Americana vibe. "I can see why Sarah trusted you." He slid into the booth that Sarah usually occupied. A deliberate move. Michael remained behind the counter, arms crossed. "You're not here for coffee," Victor chuckled. "No, I'm here for clarity." Michael raised an eyebrow. "See," Victor said, steepling his fingers. "Sarah and I go way back. We built that fund together, from scratch. When I heard she was hospitalized, I was devastated. She's a brilliant woman." Michael's jaw tightened. Is that why she filed an ethics complaint against you? Victor's smile faltered for a split second. Ah. So that's the version she gave you. No version. Just her truth. Victor leaned back, his charm returning like a mask. Look, Mike, can I call you Mike? This whole thing's gotten out of hand. You're a good man, no doubt. Decorated vet, single dad, all-American story. It's admirable. But a fund like Phoenix Valor, it's complicated. Legal, financial, regulatory. You're not trained for that. Michael didn't flinch. And you are. I've managed millions, Victor said smoothly. I know how to navigate bureaucracy, lobbying, PR. If you want to really help veterans, you need someone who can make things happen. Michael slowly walked around the counter, his boots quiet against the tile, and stood across from Victor. Sarah didn't trust you, he said calmly. She trusted me, and she wrote down why. Victor's smile faded completely now. She's not awake, is she? He said softly. So whatever she allegedly wrote, she can't confirm it. Michael leaned down, hands flat on the table, eyes locked with Victor's. She's still breathing. That's enough. Victor studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow, condescending nod. Well, he said, standing. Then let me be clear, Mr. Bray. You're holding on to something bigger than you understand. And people powerful, people don't like chaos. They prefer stability, predictability. He straightened his jacket. You're not predictable, Mike, and that makes you a liability. Michael's voice dropped. You threatening me? Of course not. Victor smiled. Just giving advice. This fund, it doesn't belong in a diner. It belongs in an office tower with people who know how to protect it. Michael let the silence hang. Then he said, Funny. Sarah told me kindness was the only thing worth protecting. Not towers, not power. Victor's smirk returned. Then let's hope kindness keeps the lights on. And with that he turned and walked out the bell, jingling cheerfully behind him, like nothing serious had just been said. An hour later, Michael sat at the back booth with Ethan helping with math homework when the front door opened again. This time, it was a crowd. 2 reporters with cameras, a woman with a microphone, and a man holding a stack of forms. Mr. Bray, the lead reporter, asked, Can we ask a few questions about the Phoenix Valor Fund? Michael rose, slowly. Ethan looked up, concerned. We just want to understand, the woman said. Are you qualified to oversee millions in assets? Do you have military background? Another chimed in. What's your relationship with Captain Monroe? Michael's gaze hardened. She's my friend, and a hero. What about the rumors that you're just a placeholder until Hale returns? The man asked. I'm not a placeholder, Michael said firmly. I'm a veteran who knows what it means to be forgotten. And I'm here to make sure no one else gets forgotten again. The cameras clicked. He didn't wait for more questions. He turned, guided Ethan to the kitchen and shut the door behind them. That night, Michael sat alone at his kitchen table again. On the counter behind him, the folder Reeves had given him lay open pages, marked notes, unscribbled. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't sought it. But he wasn't backing down. He pulled out a worn dog tag from a drawer, his own. Still scratched from Kandahar. Still cold to the touch. He wrapped the chain around his fingers, remembering every friend who never made it home. Then, slowly, he picked up the phone and dialed a number Reeves had left him. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Colonel Raymond Blake speaking. Michael's voice was steady. Colonel, this is Michael Bray. I need your help. The next morning, the town woke up to a sight that made heads turn. Hanging from the front window of Liberty Diner was a new sign, simple hand-painted Phoenix Valor Office. Temporary HQ. Below it, in smaller letters, no suits, no spin, just service. Michael stepped outside with his coffee, watching the sunrise break through the thinning clouds. A quiet pride settled in his chest. Not arrogance, not defiance, but something older. Something earned. Sarah had trusted him. Now the town would have to choose who they trusted back. At precisely 6:42 a.m., the rumble of a diesel engine echoed down Main Street. Michael Bray was already at the griddle, flipping hash browns, with the same calm focus that had once helped him disarm roadside bombs. The diner was quieter than usual. The air still carried tension from the day before, when cameras had flashed, and Victor Hale's veiled threats had darkened the doorway. But today felt different. Outside, the engine cut off. A heavy door slammed shut. Through the rain-streaked window, Michael saw a tall, broad-shouldered man in full military dress, uniform, step onto the sidewalk. The silver eagle on his cap glinted beneath the morning sun, breaking through the clouds. He didn't need a name tag. Michael recognized the posture, the walk, the silent command of presence. Colonel Raymond Blake. The door to Liberty Diner opened with a quiet chime, but it felt more like a bugle had sounded. The entire room turned. Blake walked in slowly, his gaze sweeping the space like a battlefield. Clean lines, controlled energy. A man who'd once commanded battalions and still could. Michael met him halfway across the floor. "Colonel," he said, offering a firm handshake. Sergeant Blake replied, his grip strong. "Mind if I sit down?" Michael gestured towards Sarah's usual booth. "Please." Once seated, the colonel didn't waste time. "I came as soon as I heard. Sarah's in critical condition. They gave her 30% odds of waking up." His voice was even, but something sharp shimmered beneath. "I visited her yesterday," Michael said. "She looked peaceful, but too quiet." Blake nodded slowly. "I've seen that look. Men and women caught between two worlds, the living and the gone. Sometimes it's not the injuries, it's what they feel they've left unfinished." Michael slid a fresh mug of coffee across the table. She left a lot unfinished. Blake accepted it with a grunt of thanks, then reached into his uniform jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope marked "Confidential. Personal effects." "This came from her personal locker at Fort Brighton," he said. "She listed you on her emergency contact paperwork even before the seizure started." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Why, she trusted you," Blake said simply. "She told me, if anything happens, Bray will know what's right. You earned her trust quietly day after day. That's harder than any medal." Michael opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter, a photograph, and a single dog tag, old bent, covered in sand scratches. The name read, Monroe Sarah J. OPOS, U.S. Army. The photo showed a group of soldiers in front of a burned-out Humvee. One man, Evan, the young soldier she'd spoken of, had his arm around Sarah. Both were laughing like they didn't know the future would cut short. On the back of the photo, a line was scrawled in pen. "If I can't protect them anymore, find someone who can." Michael stared at it for a long time, then looked up. She knew Hale was going to make a move. Blake's eyes hardened. She didn't just suspect it, she proved it. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. 2 months ago, Sarah found an internal audit showing Hale had funneled nearly $200,000 from the foundation into a private security firm, one that doesn't exist outside Shell Papers. She traced the payments, gathered statements, and had begun compiling it all into a classified packet for the Inspector General. Michael stiffened. "Where is it?" Missing Blake said. Her apartment was broken into 2 nights before the seizure. Nothing taken except her external hard drive and 2 red folders. Michael swore under his breath. "She told me," Blake continued, "that if something happened to her, it wouldn't be an accident. She made me promise to deliver that photo to you. And this." The colonel handed over a small key, silver, slightly tarnished. Michael stared at it. "What's this? Open a locker," Blake said. "Storage facility just outside town. under the name S.M. Brooks. It's where she stored copies of the documents Hale didn't know existed, or at least, she hoped he didn't. Michael pocketed the key. Then that's where I'm going? Blake nodded approvingly. I'll go with you. Michael hesitated. You don't have to. I do, Blake said, eyes sharp. Because I trained her. Because I failed to see what was happening before it was too late. And because this time, someone will answer for it. Michael looked him over for a long moment, then extended his hand. We do this quiet. No headlines. No noise. Blake grasped it. Delta rules. Silent but absolute. That afternoon, under the cover of an overcast sky, Michael and Blake drove 20 minutes east of Hollow Creek to an unassuming row of metal storage units near the highway. The office manager barely glanced at the paperwork once Blake flashed his military ID and Michael showed the key. Unit 14B, padlocked, undisturbed. Michael unlocked it. Inside was darkness, then the click of a flashlight. The small space was neat, meticulously organized in true military fashion. Cardboard boxes labeled in block letters. A weatherproof trunk in the center secured by a biometric lock. Michael placed his thumb on the scanner. It clicked open. Inside lay a steel binder. Locked. Tagged Confidential. Phoenix Valor Investigation. Blake opened it with trembling fingers. Dozens of pages, bank transfers, email printouts, surveillance photos, all carefully annotated. And at the top, a cover sheet in Sarah's handwriting. If you're reading this, I didn't make it. But if this reaches the right hands, maybe something good still can. Michael closed the binder. We've got him, he said. Voice like steel. Blake nodded. Now we bring it home. That night, back at the diner, Michael sat alone at the counter. The binder lay in a backpack under his stool. He thought about Sarah alone in that hospital room, her body fighting battles even now. He thought about the promise he'd made to protect what she'd built. Then he looked up at the sign taped inside the window, Phoenix Valor Office. Temporary HQ. No suits, no spin, just service. The war wasn't over. But now Michael wasn't alone. The rain had passed, but the clouds lingered. Michael Bray sat at the corner booth of Liberty Diner, his elbows resting on the tabletop, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. On the table before him lay a sealed craft envelope. Its edges were worn, and the ink on the front had smudged slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakable. To Michael Bray, in case I don't come back. Monroe, he hadn't opened it right away. The night before, after returning from the storage unit with Colonel Blake, he'd stared at it under the weak kitchen light, thumb brushing across Sarah's careful penmanship. There was something sacred about the way she'd left it. Something final. Now, with the morning sun creeping through the blinds and the diner empty, but for the smell of bacon grease and coffee grounds, he finally tore it open. Inside were three things: a handwritten letter, a folded blueprint, and a small rusted key tied with a red thread. Michael set the blueprint and key aside and began to read. Michael, if you're reading this, I'm probably lying in a hospital bed, or worse. And you're probably wondering why someone like me, who barely said 10 words a day, trusted you with millions of dollars and the storm that comes with it. It's simple. You never asked me to be okay. Everyone else either wanted to fix me, pity me, or turn me into some poster child for recovery. But you just poured coffee, cut my toast, let me exist. That kind of quiet grace is rare. And it's exactly what this foundation needs. The Phoenix Valor Fund wasn't just a mission. It was my way of giving back what I couldn't save. The young ones, the ones who never got a second chance. But as I got closer to exposing what Victor was doing, the walls started closing in. I knew I wouldn't make it to the courtroom. I knew I'd be silenced one way or another. So I built a contingency. That key belongs to a secondary site. Not the locker, Not the storage. Something older. It's the base archive at Camp Raven Rock. The military decommissioned it years ago, but the access tunnels are still there. Blake will know the way. He trained there back in '98. In the lowest level Sector C2, you'll find a crate labeled ST-47. Inside are the original hard drives from my deployment laptop and a thumb drive labeled Chimera. Hale doesn't know it exists, but it has every email chain, bank transfer, and private conversation we had. Unedited. If I fall, bring it to light. Not for me, but for every soldier who still believes the system sees them. Don't let the wrong man wear the uniform of legitimacy. You have my respect, Michael. You always did. Sarah. Michael let the letter fall gently onto the table. His breath caught somewhere between sorrow and resolve. The trust in those words wasn't light. It weighed like a rifle in a soldier's hands, familiar, personal, deadly if dropped. He picked up the key next. Small. Old. The kind you'd find in a military padlock from the late '80s. It even had rust along the edge of the shaft. Camp Raven Rock. He hadn't heard that name in years. A Cold War relic hidden in the hills, part military base, part fallout shelter, and all classified. Sarah had mentioned she'd trained there, but he never knew she'd left behind secrets that deep. His eyes shifted to the blueprint. It was a partial layout of a tunnel system. Sector C2 was circled in red ink. A set of coordinates was scribbled in the corner. Michael folded the letter blueprint and key into a manila folder and locked it inside the diner's floor safe hidden behind a panel under the counter. He had made up his mind. Today they would retrieve the drive. By noon, Colonel Blake arrived out of uniform. This time, jeans combat boots and a black jacket that still fit too well for a retired officer. He looked like a man who'd never actually stopped serving. Michael briefed him quietly at the counter. When Blake read the letter, his jaw clenched. Sector C2 Blake said almost to himself. Haven't heard that name since my last wargame simulation. It's deep. Below the old ops floor. You still remember the layout Michael asked. I never forget the places where we were trained to vanish. By 1:00 p.m., they had packed what they needed. Flashlights, gloves, rope, a digital camera, and a collapsible document scanner. Not to mention one old sidearm each tucked legally under their jackets just in case. They told no one. Camp Raven Rock was exactly as Sarah had described, forgotten, unguarded, and overgrown. The front gate was chained shut, but the padlock was long since rusted through. Michael and Blake stepped over a fallen sign that read, U.S. Military Facility. No trespassing decommissioned. The wind moaned through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and metal. At the far edge of the property, hidden behind a collapsed shed, they found the access tunnel. The steel door had been scorched by time, but was still intact. Michael slid the old key into the lock. It turned with a reluctant click. They entered. The tunnel was narrow, lit only by their flashlights and the echoes of their boots. It smelled of dust mold and memories better left buried. Blake led the way, counting turns from muscle memory. 2 lefts, 1 long corridor, then another left. They descended a stairwell choked with spider webs and debris, eventually arriving at a corroded steel hatch marked C2, storage and archives. Inside, after prying open a fallen shelf, they found it. Crate ST-47. The contents were wrapped in layers of military canvas, 2 hard drives, 1 thumb drive, and a note scribbled in Sharpie on the inside of the lid, Chimera Protocol Eyes Only. Michael snapped photos, scanned the documents, and packed everything into a waterproof satchel. They made their way out with haste. Both men now fully aware this was no longer about charity. It was about evidence. It was about justice. By sundown, they returned to Hollow Creek. Michael didn't go straight home. He didn't even go back to the diner. He went to the hospital. Sarah was still in her room unconscious. Her face was pale but calm. The IV dripped rhythmically, and the heart monitor beeped like a quiet metronome. Michael sat beside her. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the red-threaded key, and laid it gently in her palm. "I found it," he whispered. "I've got what you left behind." He leaned closer, voice steady. "You're not done fighting Sarah, and I'm not letting them bury you or what you built." He didn't expect an answer, but her fingers twitched, barely perceptible, but real. And Michael Bray smiled, because even in silence, Sarah Monroe was still fighting. The following morning, Hollow Creek woke up to a different kind of storm. Not thunder, not rain, but subpoenas, federal agents, and whispers too loud to ignore. By 9:00 a.m., the silence surrounding the Phoenix Valor Foundation had been shattered, and at the center of it stood a man no one had expected: the quiet diner owner, single father, and former Delta Force operator Michael Bray. He hadn't asked for this war, but now that it had come to his doorstep, he would finish it with the same precision he'd once used clearing compounds half a world away. Inside the diner, the door was locked, the windows covered. The closed sign hung lopsided on the front door, and behind it, Michael Colonel Blake and Attorney Douglas Reeves sat at the back booth, surrounded by printed documents, flash drives, and legal folders stacked a foot high. The Chimera files had been decrypted overnight. What they revealed was devastating. Dozens of unauthorized transfers from the Phoenix Valor Fund to offshore accounts. Shell companies tied to a firm called Hale Strategic Group. Inflated invoices for equipment never purchased. Names of dead veterans listed as consultants receiving monthly payments. All of it carefully hidden. Until now. Reeves leaned forward, tapping a document. This alone is enough to initiate federal charges. Wire fraud. Misappropriation of veteran benefits. If we get this in front of a judge, Victor Hale won't see sunlight for the next 30 years, Colonel Blake added. And we show it to the right people. Pentagon Brass Congressional Veterans Committee. They'll shut down every door he tries to slip through. Michael stared at the papers, jaw tight. She built this fund for people who came home broken, he said quietly. He turned it into a damn ATM. Reeves nodded. So the next step is clear. We file for an emergency injunction, freeze all associated accounts under Hale's name, and compel a hearing with the state attorney's office. You'll need to testify. Michael looked up. So will Sarah, if she wakes up. She will, Blake said simply. She's a soldier. She'll fight. Michael thought of her hand twitching the night before, of the key in her palm, of the way she'd looked when she first walked into his diner, guarded, haunted, but searching for something she'd believed was lost. She had found it. And now, so had he. That afternoon, Michael and Reeves drove 2 hours to the state courthouse. It was nothing grand, just a tall limestone building with peeling paint and a long metal detector line at the front. But what it lacked in aesthetics, it made up for in bureaucracy. Inside courtroom 4B, Reeves handed over the evidence packet to the clerk of the court, a stone-faced woman who barely blinked at the thickness of the file. She took it and disappeared into the judge's chamber. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, Judge Barbara Lyman, a stern woman with glasses perched low on her nose, stepped into the courtroom. She flipped through the first few pages, her brow furrowing deeper with each turn. She looked up. Mr. Reeves, you're requesting a temporary freeze on all accounts connected to Hale Strategic Group and Phoenix Valor, based on these documents. Yes, Your Honor, Reeves replied. We believe immediate action is required to prevent further dissipation of funds. And Mr. Bray, she said, turning toward Michael, you are currently serving as temporary custodian of the Phoenix Valor Fund. Yes, ma'am. And you're prepared to testify to the chain of custody of this evidence, I am. She leaned back in her chair. Well, this isn't the first time I've seen a wolf dressed as a patriot, but it's the first time I've seen a short-order cook walk into my courtroom with enough firepower to sink a yacht club. Michael didn't smile. Lyman continued. Petition granted. All accounts listed in Exhibit A are frozen effective immediately pending a formal hearing within 5 business days. If what you say is true, Mr. Bray, then I hope you're ready. Michael stood, voice steady. I've been ready since the first bullet missed me. By the next morning, it was national news. Veteran cook exposes multi-million-dollar charity fraud. Quiet hero, single dad, blows whistle on defense contractor. Who is Michael Bray, and why is he America's newest guardian? Victor Hale, ever the opportunist, tried to fight back with media of his own. He appeared on a business podcast that afternoon, brushing off the allegations. I built Phoenix Valor, he declared smoothly. Sarah Monroe was a decorated vet, yes, but she wasn't a financial mind. This sudden obsession with conspiracy is just a distraction from poor bookkeeping. But then, a journalist leaked part of the Chimera files, the screenshots of fraudulent accounts, the voice recording of Hale himself saying, "No one audits charity." That's the point. Public opinion flipped like a switch. Back in Hollow Creek, the diner reopened, not just as a breakfast joint, but as a symbol. Veterans from neighboring towns drove in. They shook Michael's hand. They left handwritten notes on napkins. They posted photos with Ethan, who beamed with pride, as if his dad had just saved the world. And in a way he had. But the war wasn't over. One evening, just before closing, Colonel Blake returned with a grim face and a single line. "He knows where you live." Michael paused mid-wipe of the countertop. Hale Blake nodded. I intercepted an encrypted message forwarded to one of his shell firm addresses. It mentioned your name, the diner, your son. Michael's jaw clenched. "He's getting desperate. He's cornered?" Blake said. "That makes him dangerous." Michael looked toward the kitchen where Ethan's laughter echoed as he finished his homework, then back at the colonel. "We finish this," he said. "Soon." Before he makes another move, Blake nodded, agreed. Then he added, "Sarah's condition hasn't changed." Michael exhaled slowly. "Then I'll bring her justice until she can see it for herself." That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Michael stood alone in the hallway of the house. The only light came from the kitchen, where the folder of evidence lay on the table. He opened it again, not because he needed to, but because sometimes, when the weight gets heavy, a man needs to remember why he's carrying it. He stared at the photo of Sarah in uniform, the joy in her face, the way she had stood tall even when everything around her crumbled. Then he whispered not to the paper, but to the woman fighting in silence across town. "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." The beeping of machines filled the room like a slow, steady heartbeat. Room 407, VA hospital, private wing. Captain Sarah Monroe had been unconscious for 11 days. Her body was still strong, but her mind had taken refuge deep inside. Doctors called it trauma-induced coma, the kind that wasn't just physical, it was psychological. A protective measure, like a soldier ducking for cover during incoming fire. No one knew if she'd wake up. But every morning at 7:00 a.m. without fail, Michael Bray walked through the sliding doors of the hospital, coffee in one hand, manila folder in the other. He'd sit beside her bed in the same chair, place the coffee on the table, and begin talking. Not because he expected her to answer, but because words had weight, and Sarah deserved to feel their gravity. That morning, as rain tapped against the window, and the sky hung low with a gray hush, Michael leaned forward and spoke softly. "They froze his accounts yesterday," he said. "Judge Lyman signed the injunction. Hale's running out of money and out of time." He glanced at her face, pale, still, but peaceful. "Blake and I met with a congressional aide. They want to review the Chimera files before the hearing. They called your foundation the most ethical initiative they've seen in years. You would have hated the praise. He chuckled faintly, said it made your ears itch. Still no movement. Michael reached into his folder and pulled out a folded napkin, the same one Ethan had once left for her at the diner. Thank you for keeping my dad company. Ethan. He placed it gently in her hand. You didn't just build a fund, Sarah. You built a movement. People are starting to believe again in dignity, in honor, in us. He swallowed. But I need you to come back. Not for the case, not for the fund, for you. For all the mornings we didn't get to finish. The monitor beeped steadily. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Michael sat back, exhaled deeply, and closed his eyes. Then something changed. The machine's rhythm skipped. He opened his eyes. Sarah's fingers twitched. Not once, not a reflex, but twice. Controlled. Intentional. Michael leaned forward so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Sarah. Her eyelids fluttered. Her head moved slightly on the pillow. Another beep. Then another. Then her lips parted. A shallow breath escaped. Michael stood gently placing his hand over hers. It's me. You're safe. She stirred again. This time her head turned slightly toward the sound of his voice. Then in a voice hoarse and dry, barely more than a whisper, she rasped, toast, triangles. Michael let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a breathless sob. You're back. Within minutes, nurses flooded the room. Monitors were checked. Vitals rerun doctors called in from other wings. The room buzzed with cautious hope. Sarah's eyes remained half-lidded, but she was conscious. Present. She gripped Michael's hand as tightly as her strength would allow. The nurse smiled. She's fighting. You did good. Michael shook his head. She did it on her own. But he knew deep down that she had heard him all along. 2 days later, Sarah sat upright in bed, pale but alert, sipping weak tea through a straw. Michael sat beside her, a small bag in his lap. She nodded toward it. Is that what I think it is? He pulled out the Chimera flash drive. She exhaled slowly. I thought it was lost. It almost was. But you left a trail. A smart one. She gave him a faint smile. Army taught me how to hide. Delta taught you how to find. They sat in silence for a moment before she added, Is it bad? Michael handed her a folder. She flipped through a few pages. Her eyes sharpened with every line. Then she stopped. Her jaw clenched. He used my signature. Michael nodded. On at least 7 transfers. I knew he was slick. I didn't know he was that bold. People get bold when they think no one's watching. Sarah looked up. You watched. Michael didn't speak. He didn't need to. She reached for his hand again this time with intention, not weakness. You saved it, she whispered. All of it. Michael shook his head. No. You gave it purpose. I just followed the map you left behind. She leaned back, letting the weight of everything settle. They want me to testify, she said. You don't have to, he replied quickly. I do, she said firmly. He doesn't just steal money. He steals honor. And that's treason in its purest form. Michael nodded slowly. Then I'll be beside you. You already have been. That evening, Sarah requested something unusual. I want to see it, she said. The diner, the booth, my place. Michael hesitated. You're still recovering. I'm recovering because of that place, she said. I need to see where it all began. 1 hour, then I'll rest. With special permission from her doctor and the assistance of Colonel Blake and a nurse, Sarah was transported in a wheelchair to Liberty Diner at sunset. The moment she entered, the entire diner went silent. Every eye turned. The scarred veteran who once sat in the corner alone had returned not as a shadow, but as a warrior standing in the light. Michael guided her to her usual booth. She looked around at the faces, Joe Hammond, the Navy vets, even the local sheriff. And then to Ethan, who stood beside the counter beaming. "You grew," she said to him with a grin. Ethan puffed his chest. "You did too." Laughter broke the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. Michael brought her a plate. Toast. Triangles. Just like always. She took one bite, eyes misting. And then, in the middle of the diner, in a moment that no one would forget, Sarah lifted her hand and raised her mug of coffee. "To kindness," she said, voice steady. "The only weapon I never learned in the field, but the only one that brought me home." Michael raised his cup beside her, to honor. The others followed, to Sarah Monroe. Outside, the sky finally cleared. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the diner's windows. Inside, something deeper glowed, stronger than vengeance, louder than corruption. It was healing, and the fight was far from over. But for now, they had won a battle worth remembering. The courthouse in Hollow Creek wasn't built for spectacle. It was a modest brick building with ivy climbing its southern wall and a flagpole that creaked when the wind blew strong. But that morning, it might as well have been the center of the nation. Camera crews flanked the sidewalk. Reporters whispered into microphones. Veterans from 3 counties lined the steps in quiet unity, wearing caps from wars most people had forgotten. Inside courtroom 3A buzzed like a wire stretched too tight. On one side of the room sat Victor Hale, crisp in a dark navy suit, his lawyer whispering in his ear. His expression was calm, almost smug. To the cameras, he was still smiling. But to anyone who knew power, he looked like a man gripping sand as it ran through his fingers. On the other side, Sarah Monroe sat upright in her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, chin raised. She wore her dress uniform medals, perfectly placed hair, tied back the long scar on her left cheek, fully visible. She had refused makeup. If I'm showing up, she had told Michael, I'm showing the truth. All of it. Michael sat beside her in a charcoal gray suit borrowed from Colonel Blake. His posture was firm, his gaze steady. He wasn't just there as support. He was listed as the first witness. Attorney Douglas Reeves stood ready at the plaintiff's table, calm and precise. His opening statement was brief. "Your Honor, we are here to reveal not just the misuse of funds, but the betrayal of the very men and women who trusted those funds would help them heal." Judge Lyman nodded. "Proceed." Michael took the stand first. Reeves approached, slowly setting a single photo in front of the jury. Sarah, in uniform, kneeling next to a young soldier. Evan, the one who hadn't come home. "Mr. Bray." Reeves began, "Tell the court how you met Captain Monroe." Michael looked directly at the jury, then at Sarah. "She walked into my diner one morning, said nothing, just sat down and stared at the rain. I didn't know who she was. I didn't ask. But I knew the look in her eyes. I've worn it myself. And how did your relationship grow? We didn't talk much at first. I poured coffee, cut toast. She came back every morning. That was it. But something passed between us. Something wordless. The kind of silence you only share with people who've seen things they wish they hadn't." Reeves stepped closer. "When did you learn about the Phoenix Valor Fund?" "When her lawyer showed up at the diner with 6 men in black suits. She was in the hospital, unconscious, and she'd left the fund under my care." Gasps stirred among the spectators. Reeves held up the Chimera thumb drive. "And what did you find inside this device?" Michael answered without pause. "The truth. Fraud. Theft. Records of fake contractors. Money moved offshore, all done through companies connected to Victor Hale. Victor's lawyer stood. Objection assumes guilt." Judge Lyman raised an eyebrow. "Overruled for now. Let's hear what he found. Michael leaned forward. We found voice recordings, emails, his signature on falsified reports. He used the names of deceased veterans to hide the trail. Men who died with honor, used like shadows. The courtroom went silent. Reeves nodded. Thank you, Mr. Bray. Next came Sarah. As she was wheeled to the witness stand, the room shifted. Even Hale sat back, his hands folded tighter. Captain Monroe Reeves said gently, "You founded the Phoenix Valor Fund." Why, Sarah's voice was soft, but every syllable struck like steel. Because I came home from war in pieces. Not just my body, my mind. I watched good people fall through cracks so wide you could drive a convoy through them. I built the fund to stop the bleeding. And Victor Hale. He was my early ally, helped with fundraising, but soon I saw patterns, money missing, companies I'd never approved. When I questioned him, he gaslit me, made me feel unstable, like I imagined it. Reeves handed her a printed email. This was one of his messages. Sarah nodded. He told me to stop playing hero and let the professionals handle it. And when you pushed back, Sarah's voice dropped. My apartment was broken into. Documents went missing. I suffered a seizure 2 days later. Doctors called it stress-related. I call it sabotage. Victor Hale stood abruptly. This is character assassination. Judge Lyman slammed her gavel. You will sit down, Mr. Hale, or I will hold you in contempt. He sat. Reeves walked to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Monroe trusted this man with her life's work, and when she refused to let him exploit her mission, she nearly lost everything, including her life. He paused, but she didn't lose her courage. During cross-examination, Victor's attorney attempted to discredit the evidence. These emails could have been manipulated, he argued. Reeves responded by introducing the original server logs time-stamped and verified. This isn't hearsay, Reeves said. It's a digital fingerprint, one only the guilty would try to wipe clean. The final blow came when Reeves played the voice recording. Hale's voice filled the room. No one audits charity. That's the point. These vets are too busy patching their lives together to follow the paper trail. Gasps erupted. Even the judge's face hardened. Victor Hale paled. By the end of the day, the jury had heard enough. Judge Lyman didn't wait for a full trial. She granted a court order for full federal investigation and asset seizure under emergency fraud statutes. Hale was to be detained immediately pending criminal indictment. As the bailiff approached him, Hale stood and snarled toward Michael and Sarah. You think this is over? Michael stood as well, calm and resolute. No, it's just beginning. Hale was led away, flanked by U.S. Marshals. Reporters surged forward. But inside the courtroom, a hush remained. Sarah looked at Michael, her voice shaking slightly. We did it. He gently rested a hand over hers. No, you did. She smiled through tears. No, she whispered. We did. Later that evening, as dusk painted Hollow Creek in gold and rust, Michael and Sarah returned to the diner. Ethan was waiting a slice of pie ready on the counter. Sarah sat at her usual booth. For the first time in weeks, she looked relaxed, truly relaxed. No weight behind her eyes, no shadow behind her smile. Michael brought her coffee. Triangle toast tomorrow, he asked. Sarah grinned. Only if you promise not to cry over it. Michael chuckled. No promises. She looked out the window, watching the American flag ripple in the breeze. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a symbol of something broken, but something still worth defending. The sun rose gently over Hollow Creek, casting a golden light across the dew-slicked pavement. The town stirred, not with urgency, but with the quiet rhythm of healing. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable, and nowhere was that more visible than at Liberty Diner. The bell above the door jingled as Michael Bray flipped the open sign to welcome home, a small change Ethan had made the night before, by scribbling over the old plastic with a Sharpie. Michael didn't change it back. He liked the message. Inside the booths were full before 7:00 a.m., not just with regulars, but with new faces, veterans from neighboring counties, a young couple in uniform on leave, and even a retired judge who'd driven in from 2 towns over just to shake the hand of the man who stared down a wolf in a 3-piece suit. Michael served coffee with quiet nods and calm eyes, but behind every refill was something deeper, a pride that came not from glory, but from doing the right thing when no one was watching. At the far booth, Sarah Monroe sat like she had always belonged there. Her wheelchair had been swapped for a cane. Her posture was straighter. The scar on her face caught the morning light, but no one looked away. They looked toward her, respectfully, thankfully. Across from her sat Colonel Blake, fresh off a late-night briefing with congressional staffers. He wore a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves and a grin that softened the warrior beneath. And just like that, he said, raising his mug, you turned a roadside diner into a command center. Sarah smirked. I just came here for coffee and toast. Michael placed a plate in front of her. Toast, triangles, crisp, perfect. She stared at it with mock suspicion. You're getting fancy, Bray. Pretty soon you'll start garnishing it with parsley. Michael shrugged. Don't tempt me. Ethan appeared at her side, notebook in hand. Captain Sarah. I have a question. She looked down at him with mock seriousness. Permission to speak, soldier. He grinned. Granted, if you're not in the army anymore, do you still get to be called captain? Or do you become Miss again? The whole booth laughed. Sarah ruffled his hair. That's a good question. I think the title stays if you earned it, even after the war is over. Ethan nodded, thoughtful. Then my dad's still sergeant, right? Michael froze mid-step behind the counter. Sarah looked at him gently. Yes, she said. And more. By mid-morning, a small ceremony began outside. It wasn't planned. It wasn't official. But someone had brought an American flag, and someone else brought a folding podium, and by the time Reeves arrived in his tan suit and weather-wrinkled briefcase, half the town was already gathered in the diner's parking lot. Sarah stepped forward on her cane, flanked by Michael and Blake. Reeves took the mic, his voice firm, clear, and full of something more than legal rhetoric. Today we acknowledge not just justice served, but honor restored. Captain Sarah Monroe defended more than a country, she defended its conscience. And Michael Bray, a quiet father, with no agenda, reminded us all that character is not declared, it is demonstrated. Applause rose like a wave. Then unexpectedly the sheriff herself stepped up. She was in uniform. Her silver badge polished her voice steady. I've served in Hollow Creek for 28 years, she said. I've seen plenty of men claim the flag. But this week, I saw 2 people live it. She turned to Michael and Sarah. You didn't just expose corruption. You reminded us what dignity looks like. Thank you for protecting the kind of America we all hope still exists. Sarah's eyes glistened. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Later that afternoon, as the crowd dispersed and the sun warmed the sidewalks, Michael returned inside to find a package on the counter. No name. No return address. He opened it carefully. Inside was a small bronze plaque engraved in clean serif letters, in honor of service. Given sacrifice, made, and dignity defended. This table is reserved always. Phoenix Valor Foundation. Michael stared at it for a long moment. Then without a word, he carried it to Sarah's booth and mounted it on the wall beside the window, right above the seat where she used to sit with trembling hands, back to the walleyes always scanning. She was scanning no longer. Now she was watching. At peace. That night, after closing, the diner was quiet again. Just Michael and Ethan wiping tables and sweeping floors. The jukebox played low an old Johnny Cash song neither of them knew the words to, but both understood. As Ethan stacked the chairs, he looked up at his father. "Are you going to go back?" he asked. Michael paused. "Back where to?" "Missions. War stuff. Delta things." Michael smiled softly. "No. I think I found my mission right here." Ethan looked relieved, then curious. "What is it?" Michael walked to the front window, looked out at the empty lot, the stars overhead, the plaque on the wall. To make sure that anyone who walks through that door, he said, feels seen, heard, safe. Ethan nodded, then added, "And full." Michael laughed. Definitely full. They stood side by side for a while, father and son soldier, and legacy warrior and future. Outside, the lights of Liberty Diner glowed warm against the night. Not because the building had changed, but because the people had. Because the quiet man with a scarred past had chosen to stand up. Because the wounded woman with a fighter's heart had chosen not to stay silent. Because kindness had not been weakness. It had been the weapon that turned the tide. And tomorrow, as the sun rose again, so would the door chime. So would the smell of coffee. So would the world, just a little brighter, a little better. All because someone chose toast. And someone else chose to care. 1 year later, Liberty Diner looked the same on the outside. Worn bricks, green awning flag rippling in the breeze. But those who stepped through its door knew it was no longer just a place for coffee and eggs. It had become a sanctuary, a gathering space, a tribute, a legacy. Inside the walls bore framed photographs of veterans past and present. Some were black and white portraits of long-departed soldiers. Others were color prints of today's warriors, many of them smiling as they stood beside Michael Bray or Captain Sarah Monroe. But it wasn't the photos that drew the eye. It was the bronze plaque mounted behind the corner booth, polished to a shine, read aloud every morning by someone new. In memory of those who served and those who still do. Phoenix Valor Foundation. It had become a tradition. Michael arrived before dawn, as always, still in his faded green jacket, still wearing boots worn soft at the heel. He moved a little slower these days, not from age, but from peace. A rare kind of peace that came after doing something hard and knowing you did it right. He poured the first pot of coffee, wiped down the counter, then stepped outside for a moment of stillness. The street was quiet, the air crisp. He inhaled deeply, letting the calm settle into his chest. Behind him, the door creaked open. "Still beating me here, huh?" He turned and smiled. Sarah Monroe leaned against the doorframe, no cane in sight. Her posture, strong eyes steady. She wore a navy blazer with a small Phoenix Valor pin on the lapel. "You're 3 minutes late," Michael said with a grin. She rolled her eyes. "Congressional hearings go late. You try keeping Senator Myers on track." He stepped aside, holding the door for her. "Welcome back, Captain." She smirked. "You know I outrank you. Not in my kitchen." At 8:00 a.m., the diner filled fast. Today was special. Exactly 1 year since the courtroom showdown. 1 year since the fund was saved. 1 year since Sarah spoke those now famous words from the booth by the window. "Kindness is the only weapon I never learned in the field, but the only one that brought me home." The words had been quoted by veterans organizations, replayed on national television, printed on bumper stickers and T-shirts. But in Hollow Creek, they were more than a soundbite. They were a promise. Ethan sat near the window, now 11 and an inch taller, helping greet visitors with a clipboard and a grin. "Welcome to Liberty. You served. You eat free." Across the room, Colonel Blake stood with a group of ROTC cadets from a local high school, explaining the story of the Chimera files like it was legend, which to them it was. And near the front, seated beneath a new hanging banner, was a woman named Teresa Green, mother of Evan, the young soldier, who died in Sarah's final deployment. Sarah had invited her personally. They had cried together that morning, then laughed, then toasted. Triangle toast, of course. At 900 sharp, Michael stepped forward. He cleared his throat. The room quieted. "I used to think this place was just a diner," he said, voice calm but strong. Somewhere quiet where a tired dad could pour coffee and not think too hard about what he used to be. He looked at Sarah. Then one morning someone walked in with scars she didn't try to hide, and instead of asking her to be okay, we gave her coffee. And toast. Chuckles rippled gently through the room. Michael continued. Turns out that small act was the first brick in something bigger. We didn't build a courthouse or a monument. We built something that breathes, that serves, that sees. He gestured to the room. This diner became a place where silence meant safety, where stories could be told or not, where the wounds of war didn't have to be explained to be understood. Applause rose soft but full of weight. Sarah stood next. "I'm not great with speeches," she began. "I was trained to lead missions, not ceremonies. But what I've learned, what Michael taught me, is that leadership isn't about volume. It's about presence." She looked out across the crowd, then settled her gaze on a table of young vets, newly discharged, unsure of their futures. "This foundation we saved, it's not just money, it's dignity. It's second chances. It's someone saying, 'I see you, and I'm staying.'" She paused, emotion brimming but contained. Victor Hale tried to take something sacred. He failed, because kindness doesn't shout, but it never retreats. The crowd stood. The applause swelled. Not thunderous, not wild, just steady like a heartbeat finally returned to rhythm. That evening after the crowd had gone, Michael and Sarah sat at the booth by the window. Just the two of them. Like old times. Outside, the last rays of sun dipped below the ridge. Inside, the warmth remained. Sarah sipped her coffee. "You ever think about how close we came to missing all of this?" Michael nodded. "Every day." She looked at him. "You could have ignored me that morning. I could have walked into another diner." "But you didn't," he said. "You walked into mine." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of a shared past dissolve into the comfort of a shared present. Ethan walked over, now holding a school flyer. Guess what he said, eyes bright? "I'm giving a speech at the Veterans Day ceremony this year." Michael raised an eyebrow. Yeah, Ethan said proudly. "My topic is, what my dad taught me about quiet heroes." Sarah smiled, mist forming in her eyes. Michael tried to speak but couldn't, so he simply pulled his son close and said, "You're gonna do just fine, kid." Ethan ran off. Sarah turned to Michael, her voice quiet. "You never needed a battlefield to be a warrior." Michael looked out the window. "No," he said. "I just needed a diner. A friend, and something worth fighting for." And so under the fading sky, as coffee cooled and stories lingered, the diner stayed open just a little longer. Not for business, for belonging. Because legacies aren't carved in stone, they're built day by day in small acts of courage, in rooms that smell like toast and coffee, in the silent strength of those who keep showing up. And that more than medals, more than trials, more than headlines, is the truest kind of valor. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Tell us your city or state in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how stories like this reach good-hearted people all across America and beyond. If you enjoyed this story and want more moments of courage, kindness, and redemption, make sure to subscribe to Soul Moment Story and turn on the little bell so you never miss the next one. From our heart to yours, thank you for spending your time with us today. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never forget, goodness always finds its way home.